Hello and greeting. How are you today? I hope everybody are feeling good. Okay, so that we can continue with the next topic in in FAR 570, that is MFRS 8 operating segment. By the end of this topic, you must have the ability to explain the main principle in the preparation of segment report, explain the 10% threshold test, identify operating segment, prepare segmental reporting, discuss the disclosure requirement of MFRS 8 operating segment. So this topic outcome will be a guidance for you after you have listened to my lecture. Okay, come back here and check whether you have the ability to do this after listening to my lecture. Okay, let's start. As we know, entity may operate in diverse nature of business that produce different product or provide different type of service. Multinational entity may operate in various countries that represent different geographical factors. Okay, if we take for example our own Malaysian company Petronas, a multinational entity operate in various countries around the world. A different product line or service provided, different geographical location will position the entity in varying degree of risk and reward. For example, company may operate in different company may operate in different country, and certain country are subjected to some nature of some geographical factors. For example, certain countries are experience earthquake, certain country are experiencing and other natural disaster, flood, typhoon. So if a multinational company operating in this country with these geographical factors, of course it will has varying degree of risk and reward. Okay, just like the current situation that we have with COVID-19. Certain country manage the issue well. Okay, so they are representing lower risk. However, there are also countries that are unable to manage the COVID-19 situation. So they are suffering a lot from that. So if this multinational company operating in those country, then it will carrying different degree of risk. Therefore, the information reported must be usable and relevant for management to run their business accordingly. Then, segment information disclosed will be based on management information reported to chief operating decision maker. Management assessment of the business performance should become more transparent. MFRS 8 operating segment require an entity to disclose information to enable user of its financial statement to evaluate the nature and financial effect of the business activity in which it engaged and the economic environment in which it operates. An entity shall report separately information about each operating segment that has been identified as reportable in this standard. Information about the different business activities and the economic environment is important to user of the financial statement because they assist user to better understand the business past performance, better assess the entity risk and return, and make more informed judgment about the entity as a whole. Okay, what need to be disclosed? MFRS8 operating segment require the entity to disclose its operating segment, its product and service, the geographical area in which it operates, its major customer. Who need to disclose? According to MFRS8, operating segment applicable to entity whose equity or debt security are publicly traded. Okay, so it's applicable to listed company, public listed company, and also entity which have filed or are in the process of filing financial statement for the purpose of issuing security in public market. So it's applicable to the company that is already publicly listed and those companies that are in the process of listing their security publicly. Okay, how to disclose? The standard is to be applied in complete set of published financial statement that comply with MFRS. So when we talk about complete set of financial statement, it refers to our statement of financial position, statement of profit or loss and other comprehensive income, cash flow statement, statement of change in equity and also notes to account. Entity present its own and consolidated financial statement, reportable segment should only be on the basis of consolidated financial statement. Okay, what is operating segment? According to MFRS8 operating segment, an operating segment is a component of an entity that engage in business activity from which it's earned revenue or incurred expenses, including revenue and expenses relating to transaction which with other component of the same entity, and component of an entity whose activities are regularly reviewed by the entity's chief operating decision maker to make decision about the resource to be allocated to the segment and assess its performance, for which discrete financial statement is available. An entity may have different operation or component about which separate financial information can be derived and are evaluated regularly by chief operating decision maker for resource allocation and assessing performance. But you must remember, not all components can be classified as operating segment. For example, if we have head office and research department that does not undertake business activities, then it cannot be classified as operating segment. However, the classification of operating segment depending on whether it's made the classification criteria. So what is the classification criteria? The business activity from which is earned revenue or incurred expenses, activity that are regularly reviewed by chief operating decision maker, and discrete financial information is available. So let's take for example, we have head office as one of the component in the entity. If the head office provide activities such as administration, accounting, human resource, internal audit that does not give rise to any revenue or incurred expenses, and the activities are not regularly reviewed by chief operating decision maker, for example, then this head office is not considered as operating segment. However, if the head office Okay, is having treasury function as part of its activity and its earned interest that could be considered as earned revenue, and the process or the activity can be regularly reviewed by chief operating decision makers, then head office in this situation can be identified as operating segment. So in order for you to identify one component, whether it's operating segment or not, you must make sure it meet the recognition criteria. Okay, if you have a discontinued operation, it still can be classified as operating segment if it's continued to engage in business activity and meet the other classification criteria as well. Since chief operating decision maker is one of the criteria that you need to consider, okay, in identifying the operating segment, we need to look at who is chief operating decision maker. Okay, it is a role and not necessarily be individual. It could be a person such as chief executive officer, or it could be a group of persons such as a group of executive. Okay, how do we identify reportable segment? Okay, so from a component of entity, you identify the operating segment. Then from the operating segment, you're going to identify the reportable segment. The operating component or an aggregation of operating segment are reportable segment. 4 key issues to consider in identifying operating segment. Okay, identifying the chief operating decision maker first, identifying business activity, some may not earn revenue or incurred expenses, determine whether discrete financial information is available for these business activities, and determine whether the information is regularly reviewed by the CODM or not. Okay, you need to look into that key issue first, because not all operating segments need to be reported separately. Operating segments are reportable if they exceed the quantitative threshold. Okay, so after you identify the operating segment, next process is for you to identify whether it is reportable segment or not. In order for you to identify whether it's reportable or not, you need to look at the quantitative threshold test. Okay, for reporting purpose, reportable segment is one that meet one of the following quantitative threshold tests. Okay, using revenue basis, profit basis, or asset basis. So, in order for it to be identified as reportable segment, we need to look at, we need to do the quantitative threshold test using these 3 bases, and for it to be identified as reportable segment, it need to be only one. Okay, fulfill the criteria in only one of the bases. So let's look into further detail what is meant by revenue basis. Okay, under revenue basis, it's reported revenue, including both sales to external customer and inter-segment sales or transfer, is 10% or more of the combined revenue, internal and external, of all operating segments. Okay, 10% or more of the combined revenue, meaning that the individual operating segment, okay, total internal and external sale is 10% or more of the combined revenue. Next, we have profit basis, where we have the absolute amount of its reported profit or loss is 10% or more of the greater in absolute amount of the combined reported profit of all operating segments that did not report a loss and the combined reported loss. If in a revenue basis, you focus on revenue amount. For profit basis, you are looking at the profit of the operating segment. For asset basis, okay, with the you are looking at the asset of the segment. Say for all these three bases, you are looking for 10% or more. Okay, let's enhance your understanding further by looking into example 1. Okay, we have Atuf has the following operating segment, the revenue, internal and external. Okay, the revenue internal and external, we have this amount is a combined amount. Okay, we have also profit amount and also total asset. Okay, according to this information, Atta Berhad has actually 5 segments. Okay, A, B, C, D, and A, B, C, D, E, and F. So what is required from you is to assist Ataf in defining the reportable segment. Okay, so let's look at how do we find the reportable segment. Okay, so this is the segment of Ataf. Just now we have A, B, C, D, E, and F. We have all the component revenue, profit or loss, and also total asset to allow us to use all three bases in the quantitative threshold. Okay, so let's look at how do we actually find the reportable segment. Okay, so if we look at the revenue basis, how do we do it? We get the total revenue. Okay, we get the total revenue for all the segment. We have the total profit, absolute profit for all 6 segments, and we also have the total asset for all the segments. Okay, so we're going to look at the revenue basis first. How do you do it? Okay, we take the individual revenue for A, divide with the total revenue for all segments. Okay, you get 12%. You do the same for B. Okay, divide with total, get 44%. Individual C, divide with total. You have individual revenue for D, individual revenue for D, divide with total. Individual revenue for E, divide with total. Individual revenue for F, divide with total. Just make sure you put total for your percentage to make sure your calculation is correct. So based on the revenue basis, realize that A is reportable segment, B also reportable segment. Okay, C is also reportable segment. Okay, we have, let's make it bigger. Okay, center. Okay, and we also have E. So from by using revenue basis, by using revenue basis, we identify A, B, C, and E to be the reportable segment. Okay. Now we try to use profit or loss for the sake of calculation. We're going to use profit or loss using profit or loss basis. By right, you dah tak perlu kira using profit or loss basis because dia perlukan only one. Okay, maknanya A, B, C and E is already qualified to be reportable segment. But for the practice, we just try for profit pula. Okay, so we have individual profit divide with total. We have individual profit for B divide with total profit. Okay, for C, you can look at here. C have a loss, right? So individual loss divide with total. It gives rise to negative percentage. Same as D. D also obtain a loss, so it gives rise to negative percentage as well. Proceed with individual profit for E, divide with total. Okay, and finally, individual profit for E, divide with total. Even though you have a loss, you can see that negative percentage is actually total up to 100 as well. Okay, so from here you can see that which one classify or identify to be reportable segment? We still have A and B. For D, no, because it must be 10% or more. This is 15%, but it's negative. Okay, and we also have for E and F. So you can see from here that this time E also qualified to be a reportable segment, even though using revenue basis is not qualified. Again, it still qualified as reportable segment since it's only need one of the it must fulfill one of the quantitative threshold tests only. Okay, we continue with the total asset. Okay, we apply the same individual total asset divide with total asset. Individual asset amount divide with total. Individual again asset amount divide with total. Individual 75 individual asset for D divide with total. Individual asset divide with total. Individual asset for F, then here it's supposed to be in this column. Divide with total. Okay, so make sure it's 100%. So from here you can see that we have 4 identified to be reportable segment. A, B, C, D, and this time you can see that D also qualified to be reportable segment. Even though earlier D did not make a reportable segment under profit basis, also not made the reportable segment under revenue basis. So based on this calculation, we can say that the entity out of actually have all the entity A, B, C, D, E, and F to be the reportable segment. Okay, all A, B, C, D, E, and F is considered to be reportable segment. Again, why? Because they only need one. Okay, kalau dia fulfill satu, dah mencukupi for it to be reportable segment. So explanation for this, you can say that when you first use the revenue basis, you identify A, B, C, and E, okay, under revenue basis. Okay, there is no need to consider the profit or asset basis. Okay, however, for the sake of calculation in this question, we still go for profit and also asset basis. But in a real life, once you identify it to be reportable segment, that's it, then it's approved to be reportable segment. Tak perlu dah kira guna threshold, quantitative threshold yang lain. Okay, then we have when we do profit or loss profit basis, we identify that D pula satisfy when we do the profit basis, we identify F pula jadi reportable segment. Okay, same also for D. That's why all 6 entity is considered to be reportable segment. Sebab yang kita perlukan hanyalah satu year sahaja ataupun satu je yang lebih daripada satu sahaja yang 10% dan ke atas. Okay. Next, we're going to look at constraint. There is constraint that you need to consider, known as 75% constraint. After the initial identification, an entity shall determine whether the total external revenue reported by operating segment constitutes 75% of the total consolidated or entity revenue. If the total external revenue is less than 75%, operational operating segment shall be identified as reportable segment even they do not meet the quantitative threshold until at least 75% of the entity revenue is included in the reportable segment. Okay, 75% constraint is something that you need to look into after you already identify which operating segment is the reportable segment. Okay, once you already have the list of the reportable segment, you need to check for 75% constraint. Okay, let's look at illustration later. Okay, the next reportable segment selected should be based on the next most meaningful operating segment, such as the largest in terms of revenue. Immaterial segment may be combined with material segment if the aggregation is consistent with the core business aggregation. Okay, let's look at what is meant by aggregation of operating segment. Two or more operating segments can be combined and reported as on if they have similar economic characteristic and performance and certain conditions are met. Segment aggregated must be similar in each of the following respect. Aggregation di mana you can gabung. Okay, gabung several operating segment. Okay, the segment aggregated must be similar in each of the following respect. For example, nature of the product or service, the nature of the production process, the type or class of customer for the product or service, the method used to distribute the product or service, nature of the regulatory environment, for example, banking, insurance, public utilities, if applicable. Okay, let's take example. Okay, let's take this example. Okay, we refer this to example 3, even though if you click it's supposed to be example 2. Okay, tapi tulis kat sini example 3. So we just follow what is stated here. So if you look at in this information, we have entities as the following operating segment. So we have A is food manufacturing in China, B is food manufacturing but it is in India, C is food also but retail, D is IT consulting in Australia, E is IT consulting in Asia, F is electrical goods retail, G is plant hire service, H is financial service. So identify the reportable segment. So this one, the information is already calculated for you. Okay. So you can see the reportable segment. If you use revenue basis, it will be 3, right? We have, okay, if you use revenue basis, it will be, it will be, haluskan dia sikit. It will be A, it will be C, and it also D. Okay. If we are looking in profit, we have A, we have also B. Tadi B tak masuk, but this time B included. We have C, we also have D. So sama. Okay, for total asset, we have A, we have B, we have C, and also we have D. So in this situation, based on the quantitative threshold, we can see that A is one of the reportable segment, B also, C, and also D. So we have A, B, C, D identified to be the reportable segment. Okay. Okay, initial reportable segment with will be A, B, C, and D. The total revenue of these 4 segments amounted to less than 75%. Is it correct? Okay, the total revenue. Okay, we are looking only for revenue. Okay, the total revenue, 75% constraint is looking at only revenue. So if you look at, okay, in here revenue, okay, what you need to do is take your calculator and calculate 25 plus 7 plus 25 plus 15. So what do you have? Okay, do you have more than 75%? Okay, so okay, you do not manage to get the 75% requirement. So that what is meant by 75% constant. Remember, we are looking only at revenue when we refer to 75% constraint. So initially, A plus B plus C and plus D, the total revenue of these 4 segments is less than 75%. Therefore, other reportable segment will have to be identified or to be aggregated. Okay. Okay, E could be aggregated with D or even be reported as a separate reportable segment. F, G, and H will be reported under all other segments. So you need to find first what is the rule of aggregation. You need to show the aggregation. Okay, you aggregate according to the requirements. Sama ada nature dia sama IT, nature dia sama food. Okay, it must be similar in nature ataupun location. Okay, looking at the requirement as mentioned earlier. So in here, how do you find the another segment to fulfill the 75% constraint? A, B, C, and D is already included. Okay, you may have what? Which one? Yang you nak ambil E, F, G, or H. So in this situation, yang you boleh ambil is only E. Okay, why? Because you can aggregate with D. Okay, you can combine D and E. Okay, ataupun kalau you tak nak combine pun tak apa. How do you choose? You must fulfill the requirement mentioned earlier. Okay, I recall back to what we have as the requirement of the constraint. It stated that the next reportable segment selected should be based on the next most meaningful operating segment, such as the largest in terms of revenue. Okay, so you may have decided that KE is IT consulting in Asia that give rise to maybe highest profit. Okay, it will depend on the company judgment, but you need to add one more operating segment even though previously dia tak meet 10% threshold. Tapi sebab apa? Sebab you ada 75% constraint. You kena cari sikit lagi nak cukupkan the 75% constraint. Sebab tadi sikit saja lagi. So you tambah another one operating segment, then you will have more than 75%. Okay. Okay, so what happened to the rest of the segment that do not meet the criteria for classification? It will be classified as all other segment category, separate from other reconciling item in the reconciliation item reconciliation required. Source of the revenue included in all other segment category shall be described. The threshold mentioned that the amount reported to the chief operating decision maker for decision making, and it may not be the same from what is reported for external reporting, and it's not the same as the general purpose of financial statement. So in preparing this internal report, adjustment and elimination may be made. Okay, revenue, expenses, gain and loss may have to be allocated to segment. Asset and liability refer to the segment's result, and asset and liability that will be used for the CODM. Amount included in the segment result, asset and liability may be different from the amount reported by the entity. Okay, for comparative information, for comparability of segment information between current and previous, the following are observed. The segment identified as a reportable segment in the previous year because it satisfied the relevant 10% threshold should continue to be treated as reportable segment for the current year if it's no longer meet the 10% threshold if it's of continuing significance. Okay, so for comparability purposes, okay, last year dia adalah reportable segment. This year dia tak meet the criteria to be reportable segment. In this situation, you still need to show the information. You still need to consider this entity to be reportable segment this year as well, or in the current year, supaya baru boleh compare. Last year ada, this year tak ada, macam mana you nak compare? So last year dia reportable, sebab you nak compare, this year you kena tunjuk juga dia sebagai reportable segment. If a segment is identified as a reportable segment in the current year because it satisfies the relevant 10% threshold, the prior period segment that are presented for comparative purpose should, unless it is impracticable to do so, be restated to reflect the newly reportable segment. Kalau tadi kita ada situation last year dia meet reportable segment, this year dia tak meet reportable segment, this year bila you prepare you tetap tunjuk dia sebagai reportable segment. Another situation that you have here is this year dia reportable segment, tapi last year dia tak reportable segment. So the issue is nak compare dengan apa. In that situation, this year reportable segment, you kena present juga last year information as part of the reportable segment. However, you kena adjust sikit lah. You need to restate the information in order for you to make it reportable segment. Next, in terms of number of segment, to be practicable, MFRS8 recommend that the number of segment do not exceed 10. Okay, kalau banyak sangat, then boleh pula. Okay, so do not exceed 10. Okay, the following general information is to be disclosed. Factors used. Okay, next we look at into disclosure. We have several information that you need to consider in providing the information for disclosure purposes. Okay, factors used to determine reportable segment, type of product and service of each reportable segment. Here you have to disclose this financial information. Okay, for each segment, the following are to be disclosed. We have profit or loss, total asset, liabilities, revenue. Okay, for external customer, revenue from inter-segment transaction, interest revenue, interest expenses, depreciation and amortization. Okay, material item, share of profit, income tax expenses, material non-item or other than depreciation amortization. Okay, so you have several requirements on what should be shown as your reportable segment. Okay, you have information. 4.3 is for the measurement. I think this one you can read on your own in order to assist you in completing your project. Here we have the reconciliation statement. You need to understand the disclosure part to assist you in understanding the annual report. Okay.